Welcome to Forest Chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and today we're talking with John Pendse about completing his 100th raced marathon. John started racing marathons at about 21 years of age, and he's a fast runner and he can run far. He has some very good results and has been very focused on achieving 100 marathon race finishes. Welcome to Forest Chat, John.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been quite a journey over the last 20 years. So just a little bit brief background. I am 43 now, so if anyone's seen me, I'm probably quite short of stature, I guess. So I was a bit taller when I first started, but over the years I've inched a bit closer to the ground year after year.
You've worn off the soles of your shoes.
I've gone through quite a few pairs of shoes now, so being an accountant, savvy, I guess, in terms of trying to save money. So my shoes now, I keep them until when I get holes in my socks, it's time for a new pair of shoes. So it used to be about the 1,000-kilometre mark, get a new pair of running shoes. These days, it only takes me probably 10 weeks and I've done 1,000 kilometres. So I need to get a few more kilometres out of the shoes before I throw them away.
You think, running's easy, you can just get out there and do it. But those shoes, they don't last quite as long as you think.
No, that's right. I guess it goes back to when I was age 15, getting into the school cross-country running. That was quite my first step into the long-distance side of running. So the shorter distances I was never good at, but put me in the 1,500 metres at school, and I sort of finished in the top handful of people. So age 15, that's when the journey officially started, I guess. But it was probably my first marathon about age 21 when I first did my first marathon, and took me that 6-year period, I guess, just to get into the love for the long distance running. So I say to people, running is a lifelong career journey. So don't worry about the couple of years. It's that 20-year horizon. So your goals shift over that time duration. So what you might start off with, it really doesn't matter. It's the year after year, decade after decade, I guess, to work out what has worked, how you can get the best out of yourself over that time. So your goals do adjust over the time, and I guess we'll get into some of those details as to what's worked for me and the frameworks and how they got established early on.
John, what is a raced marathon?
Okay, so the marathon's a standard distance of 42.195 kilometres. In the old days, it's 26.1 miles. So that's the standard distance, and you get them all over the world. The marathon, it's an organised event. People turn up and run the distance, the 42.2 kilometres. Each city, I guess, you think of the Londons, New Yorks, Bostons.
So those are the 6 majors, is that
Yeah,
correct?
That's right, the world majors. So I actually haven't done any of the world majors. So I've been just staying locally in Australia, but I've done Sydney Marathon and Gold Coast and a lot of local ones in WA. So predominantly I prefer just to do the local ones. So the Rottnest Marathon and Perth and Bunbury, Busselton, those sort of marathons. I mean, the race itself, it's any long distance run. It's a timed race. When you finish a marathon, you do get a medal generally. So compared to, say, a park run, if you do the marathon, you get the finisher's medal, you get a finish time, you might get a finisher's shirt. So it's a bit more a life achievement, I guess. So a bucket list item. Once you've done one, for some people, they're happy with that. So they may never do another one again. So I guess if you've done one marathon or 100 marathons in my case, I still say we're equivalent. We're both marathon finishers and we've pushed ourselves on the line. What's come of it at the end of it, we've both done the same race. One may be slightly quicker than the other. There's always someone quicker, always someone slower. So really, you're not racing other people in the race. It's about pushing yourself to limits and then trying to improve if that's what you want to do. And it's a journey, so each race is a milestone.
There's a whole raft of people, like the world record somewhere around 2 hours. And a lot of events have cut-offs that are probably around 6 or 7 hours?
Yeah, so depending on the race, I guess, but roughly 6.5 to 7 hours would be a race cut-off time. And yeah, the world record, I think it's about 2 hours and 30 seconds. So they have broken the 2 hours in an unofficial race. It's single standalone race set up specifically to try and break 2 hours. So they had pacers coming in and out of the race to hold the pace to break 2 hours. So Eliud Kipchoge was the guy that broke 2 hours.
And the little bit of footage, like literally he was the only one that did the full distance?
Yeah, correct. So the pacers came in and out every 5 kilometres. So they maintained an even pace and he just had to hang in the group. So there's a bit of drafting that was going on in terms of trying to get the most efficient with cutting out the wind and the race lines. For him, every second counted.
So that was a huge effort, but not a record, because the record is for people who've run it in a timed race with other people there, and none of that, although there's probably still pacing goes on, but you're not paced all the way to the finish line like he was.
So in the race, you have to start the race. Everyone starts at the same time, and then if you drop out of the race, you're out of the race. So that's why the paces generally only last 25, 30 kilometres before they drop out, and then it's the winner. He's got another 10, 15 kilometres left to run by himself. So this is the pointy end, the elite runners of the best. These are full-time professional athletes, paid a lot of money in terms of running scene. So for myself, I've always been a very good amateur runner. So I guess some of my best marathon time is 2 hours, 41 minutes. So it's a fair bit back from a 2 hour time. And in Australia, you're talking the 2 hour 10 is Australia's best marathon runners. So I'm still half an hour behind that. But you look at those top runners and see what's working for them and the framework, and you're trying to adapt and use that in your own run journey. What's working for the best runners, we can learn from that as well as your everyday runners. And then you can excel at yourself and push yourself to improve on your own personal best times. And then you've got a range of different distances. So for me, marathon running is my preferred favourite distance to run, but I also run the 5 kilometres, 10 kilometres, half marathon, and we'll probably even touch on the ultra marathons. So we'll get to that. But my shorter distances lead into the longer distances in terms of what is an equivalent race time. So for me, a 2 hour 41 marathon, my 5K PB is about the 16:40, and it's on par with an equivalent race time for that distance. So you want to work on some of your shorter distances before you move and step up to the longer distances. So you need to have the framework in place in order to how can you improve your marathon time. You do need to get quicker at the shorter distances.
Just coming back to the event structures, so normally there's a club or an organiser who's put together a course and a whole heap of volunteers usually to be along the course. And what do you get to along the course?
Well, you got aid stations along the way. There's certain rules that they have to follow. So a race director, the course is generally accurately measured. Now you can have an A course and a B course. So A would be setting world record standards. So there's a lot that goes into that in terms of the proper certification. There's rules around it, and they have to use I think it's called a Jones counter that's done on a calibrated bike, those sort of things. But for local runs where you might have, say, 100, 200 runners in it, it will cost too much to go through an A qualification to get it properly world record ratified. So the B courses would be using like a hand measuring wheel. So the race directors will go through those steps to get their race accurately measured for the 42.2 kilometres. And they also have to have volunteers so that it's well signposted, marshals at turnaround points, need to put the course map together. There's a bit of things that go into it, have an entry process, you pay an entry fee. Then putting on the race itself might have aid stations every 5 kilometres generally for having water, electrolytes, gels, those sort of things. So everything's set up for the runner to be able to just turn up and race it on the day. Races are comparable. So if you've done a marathon, it's the same distance as to a marathon held somewhere else. So they're trying to have that consistency, the framework in place to run the marathons. It's a standardised process to get it approved.
There's a whole lot of things that have gone into place, and they're pretty consistent from event to event. Differences are in the elevation that you might approach on the course. And the surface, and I imagine the A-type courses are probably smoother and things like that, I'd imagine.
Yeah, probably a little bit quicker, and they might have road closures in place, and trying to have a faster course to attract some of the top runners from various states or international runners. You got things like prize money as well. So some of the bigger races might have, say, $10,000, $20,000 prize money, world record bonuses, those sort of things. So it's quite a draw card then in terms of having a world major put on. So Sydney's recently been given the tick as I think it might be number 7 on the world majors. So I think in terms of world majors, you've got London, New York, Boston, Berlin, Chicago, Tokyo, and I think Sydney as well now. So you get maybe 40,000 people running in those races. So that's really the best of the best marathon runners will go to those events to try and win the prize money. But the local ones, I've done some of the bigger races. So my biggest race is probably Sydney Marathon, probably had close to 8,000 or 9,000 people the year I ran it. And then at the other side of the spectrum, I've run in races that might have had probably 20 to 25 people. I think Geraldton might have been one of the smaller races I've done. So there's quite a difference, but it's still the standardised approach. And then if you're going for different times, it's good to have people that you can run with as well. So I've done races where I've run the entire way myself. Other races I've been in different pace groups, say breaking 3 hours. So for amateur runners, 3 hours is a good benchmark time to try and break, but you also get the 4 hours, 5 hour runners. They're also going for their milestone to try and break those time barriers. So in marathon running, different milestone to break different times. It's a real carrot, I guess, that help inspire people to push themselves and break those time barriers. So there's something special to take away. It doesn't matter if you're trying to break 2.5 hours, 3, 4, 5 hours. For that person running it on that day, trying to break their best time, it's on par with someone who's maybe breaking a world record. Maybe not the prize associated with it, but it's that personal achievement and that personal milestone and what it represents, having that finished medal. I think everyone who's done a marathon would appreciate and know truly what it takes and it has taken for them along their journey.
And it's a beautiful thing to see people achieving that. So, John, what does it take you to run 100 raced marathons?
Yeah, so I've always been a fan of, for me, there's a term I use saying, I can, I am, and then I like to think of putting in words into that. So, for example, I am strong, I am motivated, I am happy, I am healthy, I am able, I am inspired, and I am focused. So each of those things is just empowering words. So when I'm racing, I think of these things sometimes, and just sometimes it's just that single word in a race. So sometimes I think, what's my word in this race? And it might be, say, for example, inspired. So what's recent, like in the build up to that marathon? Where am I at? What's my current inspiration in terms of, like, you want to be empowered for different races as to just to have at the back of your mind. I like keep it short and simple. So the one word motivation helps just to have that at the back of your mind, and then that's what you can fall back on in that particular race. So maybe write it on back of your hand or somewhere that you can just visually see it. These are just very small tips that I've used that just help empower you to push yourself and the reason for your running. So we've all got different reasons as to why we're out there running, and to do week after week, month after month, year after year, there's something special for you to keep going. You don't want to be burnt out and stop running early on. You want to gradually build over time. We're all creatures of habits where, as humans, there's certain things that make us who we are, and you need to tap into that. So I always think when you finish a run, are you ever disappointed in a training run? So generally it's hardest just to get out the door and start a run. But if you get past that, just that hurdle, put your race shoes on, or not race shoes, your training shoes, and you have your clothes ready to go. I like to run first thing in the morning, so there's no excuses that way. Get it done first thing in the morning. Okay, it's always hard to get out of bed, but once you've slowly get past those small hurdles, as you build on it, it's no longer a hurdle. So you want to have as least excuses as possible so that you can just go out and run. So the training is the hard part. Racing is easy. It's the training. So it's for marathons, I'm generally training all year round for marathon running, but I will peak up and down during the year in terms of getting my peak performance, and you have a roller coaster of training. So you adapt during the year. So you start off the year and you gradually, month after month, slowly try and peak towards your goal races. So it's that gradual approach, and you use the human biology framework as to how can we tap into that. So the routine of being able to just build up your routine, get past that 6 weeks, it becomes a routine. You stick on your routine and it's become habit. So it's learning on these little things, and that's what I've done in my whole 20 years of marathon running. It's focusing on the routine, the discipline, the focus, and the reason why I'm running. So the healthy lifestyle, being inspired. So the 100 marathons has always been a long-term vision, and it's always been something that I've thought I would love to hit 100 marathons. How am I going to get there? And I knew it was going to be probably a 20-year journey to get there. And I didn't think try and do the 100 marathons as quick as possible. It was about having a sustainable approach, doing 4 or 5 marathons a year, but over a long-term duration. So you're trying to minimize injury and downtime and just keep the training going, and then you put your races in. So it's been that long-term approach.
So with that ebbing and flowing effect, have there been times when you've stopped to the point where you go, wow, this is really hard to get back?
You have to have that solid training behind you. So for me, when I'm training, it's about hitting the flow state, I guess, in terms of the fresh air, the finding the zen, the stress-free. These are reasons why we love running. So if you can find that sweet spot in terms of that's why we're running. We're not going out there and it's a chore. We're doing it because we just love the running. So the speed that you're running at doesn't really matter. So if you're training at 5, 6, 7 minute kilometer pace, you're trying to find that free state feeling where minutes can just feel like hours and hours.
Time is no longer relevant.
Exactly. So when you find that state and it's the enjoyment, that's what you're looking for. So everything else is just relative to that fixed state, I guess. So you find that point and you want to just build on it week after week, month after month. So it's something that grows with you over time. I try not to put pressure on myself to perform because it's a long-term approach, and I've adapted and improved my race times over many years, working what works for me. There's different training regimes, how many kilometers a week you can do, how many interval sessions, your long runs. These are all things that come with time and your experience.
So the flow state is actually a well-known thing. It applies to work. You're far more productive when you're in the flow state at work, and then you're very easily pulled out of your flow state, particularly at work, by distractions and phone calls ringing, all those sorts of things. Knowing how to get yourself into a flow state is something that is actually really special. So do you by chance have a process that you go through that helps you get into that flow state?
Yep. So I've never used music when I've been running because for me, it doesn't work for me. So first of all, I can't run with music, and the fresh air and just getting the heart rate up, the endorphin rush, for me, once I get through the first couple of kilometers just warming up, the run's easy then, because it might be, say I'm going out for an hour's run. I can do that day in, day out. I've worked on what the structured framework for training works for me. So you have recovery runs, some interval sessions, a medium distance run, and a long distance run. So that forms the framework from a week to week process in terms of just doing those stock standard runs. Probably about 14, 15 years ago, I introduced double days. So one run wasn't enough. I wanted to do 2. But the second run would generally be, say, half an hour to 40 minutes. And it was more stimulating the endurance and time on feet for marathon running. So if you can run in a tired state, your body just becomes accustomed to it, and you want to build for me, it was about building up my base kilometres, roughly, say, 100 kilometres a week. But in the early days, I was probably running 30 to 40 kilometres a week. And it took me several years to build it up to the 100 kilometres. And then I threw in the double days, and I'd get up to, say, the 120 to 140 kilometre range. And probably in the last 5 years, I'm running 140 to 160 kilometres a week. But that's probably been in the last 4 or 5 years as I've slowly tailored what's worked for me and build up your strength and endurance. So there is the structure behind it to help you push yourself along. So you can't just be stale in your training approach, I guess. You do need to change things up sometime, or go off roads, maybe some trails, go different route that you might not be used to. Or park runs is a perfect example where you can go and run at different park runs week in, week out, just drive somewhere else, just mix it up a little bit. So the park runs for me, I'm big into the park runs because it's just every Saturday, 5 kilometres, turn up. If you want to race it, you can race it. If you want to use it as a training run where, say, you might progressively run each kilometre quicker, you can adapt what works, do a test race, I guess. So start slow, finish fast, start fast, finish slow, these sort of things, or 1 kilometre on, 1 kilometre off. The park run's just a good way of just working out. Push yourself to your limits if you want to time trial, and you want to have feedback along the way as to where you're at in your training. So I like to not train for one race. Some people might have a 6-month training block and they rarely race. So they don't get the feedback in terms of where they're at in their training. They're trusting their 6-month, or maybe it's a longer 6 to 8 month marathon training plan with not many races in it. I'm the opposite. I like to race almost every 1 or 2 weeks. The shorter distances, throw in a half marathon of 10 kilometres, but it's the stepping stones along the way to the marathon. So I like to race many times a year rather than just 1 or 2 races a year. So I like to have the feedback, and that's why I'm running 4 or 5 marathons a year, just to give me that feedback. And I'm using it as stepping stone towards the next marathon. Start of the year, I might be in that 3-hour range for a marathon running, just because I've had a bit of downtime over Christmas. Come March, April, I might be closer to 2-hour 50 marathon. June, July, I'm probably closer to 2-hour 45. And in the last couple of years, I've been closer to 2-hour 40 marathon. It takes you that 3-4 months of having that fine-tuning what works for you, dropping the kilograms down. I mean, everyone's each to their own what works for them. Doesn't work for everyone. And this has taken me quite some time to work out my best approach, what works for me. From the distraction side of things, running is my outlet to then not be distracted at work, I guess. So I like to go for lunchtime runs at work. So just to get escape from day to day. I'm a finance manager, so accountant by trade, I guess, in terms of in front of the computer all day. But having a lunch break just to break up the day, go out fresh air, get the blood flowing, the endorphins, go back to your desk and just a little bit more focused then. So for me personally, I think my day job helps me be a better runner. So I have tried being a full-time runner. It doesn't work for me. So I need to have having a desk job works well because you're off your legs and sitting down, and then go out so I might do a run before work at lunchtime. Generally it doesn't work for me, evening run. Just by the end of the day, I'm ready to put my feet up. But that's why I like doing my run first thing in the morning when you wake up. For me, it works better. So the distractions, you want to structure your day to get what's your priority, get your things done first thing in the day, for example, or a lunchtime run. No excuses then. You have a shower at the end of it and go back to work. But everyone's got a different routine that works for them. So time is the finite source, I guess. So how much time are you willing to dedicate to what you're trying to do at that particular time? And it's a journey, I guess. So over time, in the early days, I might be training 4 or 5 hours a week. These days, I'm probably doing 12 to 15 hours a week. So you need to work out how you're going to fit that time in to become a priority. So might mean you get up an extra half an hour earlier in the morning, but you're ticking it off, you're getting it done every day, or say you 3-4 days a week, whatever it is where you're at in your journey. And it might not be running, it could be cycling, swimming, all these other things that people enjoy promoting a healthier lifestyle, I guess. So if you find what your passion is and you stick to it, you're going to become better and a more all-round better person for you.
That's really a good point, because you go, okay, you're finding what you want to do, you're finding what suits you, and then it's actually benefiting every area of your life.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, my kids are 14 and 15. I've always tried being, I mean, I'm sure everyone else does as well, but your best role model, knowing that you're highly influencing the outcome of your developing young kids. So trying to promote what is a healthy lifestyle, how do you set goals, and then along the way, the ups and the downs, but you still got the vision to achieve what you're setting out to do. So I think it's extremely important. And even in the run community, a lot of people know my name in the WA run community. Doesn't mean I'm the best runner, but I consistently get out there. I have good days and bad days. Some races are worse than others for different reasons, but the passion, the love, I just love getting out there and putting myself on the line. So some people have seen me in races. I might blow up in a race, hit the wall, I guess. So the marathon's something that tests you and puts you to your limit. But it's the people that see you out there doing it week after week. They know that you're putting yourself on the line, and there's no guarantee of success. But the fact that you're going to come back and do it again the next week and the week after.
We've heard now a lot about what it takes, John, to run 100 raced marathons. We'll have a break now, and after the break, we'll come back and look at what it means. Now that we've had a look at what it takes, let's have a look at what it means. John, what does it mean to you, your family, or the community that you've been able to complete 100 raced marathons?
Yeah, so for me, I take a lot of inspiration. It's a reverse inspiration, I guess. So I see the community runners, the back of the pack runners, the slower runners, they're as passionate, if not more passionate than I am about running. And I take inspiration from that, because the longer you're out there in these races, the harder it is. So if the quicker runners have trained for it and have put themselves on the line, they're finishing sometimes half an hour ahead of some of the middle runners, and then the back of the pack runners are coming in 2 hours later. So for me, I get inspiration from that, because I know what they've had to go through to get to that finish line. They've pushed themselves to their breaking points, I guess. In the community, you get all-round abilities, I guess, in terms of we're all equals and we're equivalents in terms of when it comes to putting ourselves, we're all turning up for the same race. So it doesn't matter if you're winning the race or coming last. There's a reason that we're out there doing what we love doing. So for me, it means being able to give back to community, having your name out there as well. So it's not putting pressure on yourself, but your name is someone others look up to and use you as a gauge as well, in terms of it's good to see some of the top end runners still have bad races. So when you race so much, there are some races where, for whatever reason, you might fall back in the race. Your heart rates, you've gone out too quick, but it's been able to come that adversity and having your experience to know what to do and persevere and push through and still finish the race. So I like to, my bad races are almost as important to me as my better races. So a personal best it's a reason, it's a personal milestone for yourself. But the slower runs are just as important for some of those community runners and for family and friends to see that you're just a everyday runner as well. So I think it's very important to show that, not to put ourselves on pedestals, and I like to be on par with everyone else. And we all have that passion as well. So it's good to have somewhere as a middle ground to come together and have a chat. And there's a lot of common denominators, I guess, across the running is just our passion in terms of the sport that we're in, but you can apply the same principles to other sports and other community events and hobbies, and that's why we come together as a community. We got the love for finishing the races and having the respect, seeing people come back and they're still there years later. So you're also you're building relationships with people along that time.
So you're getting the common activities, whatever that activity is, you're out there doing it together, and then you're sharing in the rewards and benefits of taking part in those activities.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, failure is essential, really. So I've had several did not finishes in races where I've actually, so a couple of ultra marathons. One of the races, the Delirious West, I went back a second time. So this is a 200-mile race. And it was probably within the first 10 kilometers, I rolled my ankle to the point where I couldn't run on it. So I had to pull out of that race. But some of these failures, they make us a better runner as well. So there are setbacks along the way, but it's sometimes you have to accept the race wasn't meant to be on that particular day for whatever reason. So failure is part of success, really. So you become a more resilient runner, and it helps give you the mindset of growth for future success. It's the same in work and other passions that you have. So the failure, and it's that circle framework, I guess, in terms of going through the process. Sometimes there is the failure, but when you go back and start again, it means you're adding to your experience to make you a better person, better runner, and the love for life, I guess, at the end of the day.
Running teach you a lot about life.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, it's for me, running keeps me grounded, I guess. So that's the constant, I guess. It's always there. Running is something that I can do day in, day out, and it makes me a better person. I just enjoy it. So it's every time in running, sometimes you step back, you reflect, and you adapt, ready to move forwards in terms of setting your next challenge. As part of my 100 marathons, as a side interest, I have done a few ultra marathons. So an ultra marathon is anything more than the 42.2 kilometers. So an ultra marathon, 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers. So the longest race I've done was, like I mentioned, the Delirious West 200-mile race. So approximately 320 kilometers. So I've used ultra marathons as just to give me a more broader experience, because I found the mindset gives you an extra tool in your marathon toolbox, I guess. So I've used ultra marathon running to make me a stronger marathon runner. So your mind shift changes after you've done a 100-kilometer race or a 200-mile race. Really resets boundaries and makes you take a step back and appreciate what the marathon distance truly means for you.
Interesting thing to think about, that expansion of your boundaries, your capabilities. That's quite a big thing that is a real positive in your life.
Mastering the marathon is one thing, but to become a more rounded runner, I think you do have to push yourself mentally so that you're just a stronger all-round runner. So some of my ultra marathons, the training for those ultra marathons, I did some all-night running. So as part of my 200-mile race, I live in Kingsley, and I chose to run to Mandurah, which is 110 kilometres away. So I started about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I planned to get to Rockingham for 8 o'clock for the park run. So it was a 65-kilometre warm-up to get to Rockingham for the park run. So I turned up probably about 20, 30 minutes beforehand. So 65-kilometre warm-up, and I felt good by that stage. I went out and I think I did a sub 20-minute park run, which I was happy with. But I still had another 30 kilometres after that to get to Mandurah, and then I got the train home. But I mean, something like that, you set yourself up, just you think of an extreme situation, you just have to go in the deep end, put yourself in it. You're not going to give up, however long it takes. I set out these were deliberate training goals as to getting me ready for a 200-mile race. So as part of that, I had to find my breaking point in terms of an ultra marathon distance. So I'd done, before the 200-mile race, I had done a 5-time 100-kilometre race in the Australind Australia Day race. So I was well experienced ultra marathon runner, but 200 miles was the next level, I guess, in terms of a distance. So that's why one of the challenges in the 200-mile race was setting myself some new challenges that's going to push me beyond my comfort zone. So I did find my breaking point that particular day, but I did push on and get to Mandurah. Luckily, I still had my smart card train card, so I could get the train home. So that would have been a bit of a struggle if I got there and didn't have my train card, and I didn't have any money as well. So I probably should have thought that one through a little bit better. But I did have my train card, so I could get home.
That's it. When I was a youngster, I had to ask a taxi driver for 5 cents to complete my fee to get on the train to get back to school. So similar sort of thing. So it's really interesting having those experiences where literally you just go out and do it, and you get to the end and you go, okay, now what do I do?
Yeah, I think pushing yourself beyond what your normal limits are, it's part of having that longer term vision, what you are setting yourself up to achieve. So for me, I want the marathon is important to me, but the ultra marathons for a few years, I was focused on the ultra marathon running just to give me that all round ability and the passion for just running hour after hour. It takes a lot out of you, but you adjust your pace. You're looking at hydration, nutrition, your run gear, so your shoes, camelbacks, those sort of things, like how you're actually going to get to the 200-mile distance, I guess. So you need to adapt and work out what your new goal is that you're working towards, and then adjust, use your experience and move forwards and just have a methodical approach. So it's good having the SMART principle, I guess, in terms of specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and a time frame. So these are things that I use to structure a training program as to what the outcome that I'm aiming towards. Because you do want success at the end of the day as well. So personal success, that's part of the motivation that pushes us and incentivizes us to get to the end and see it through.
Yes, and you don't get there unless you've set the goal in the first place. And the SMART goals that you mentioned, that's a very important concept to understand in order to have goals that you can actually achieve.
Yeah, so you want to celebrate the small wins along the way. So for me, it's been a gradual, what are the small wins that I can take? And then how can I take the small wins and move forwards and build it up? So, I mean, generally for long distance runners, they start off with the 5 and 10 kilometers and half marathon. It's a gradual approach. So you chip away at it week after week, month after month, but you're slowly just moving towards a longer term vision and a longer term goal. So don't be in a rush to get to what your long-term vision is. There's no real rush and urgency to get there straight away, because you want to leave some things. You will become a better runner year after year. So if your goal was to run a marathon after 6 months or a year, that's all well and good, and that's going to incentivize you for that particular goal. But don't write off the fact that you'd be a better marathon runner in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. It's part of that adaptation process, and your body takes time to make it the best version of itself to achieve your best outcome. So some of us, just doing more kilometers each week is going to make you a better runner. Making your long run go from 15 kilometers to 25 to 30 kilometers as a long distance, your long run for that week, you'll become a better runner if you just focus on that and build on it. So you want to start small and work up to the bigger wins along the way. So for me, year after year, I've had the small wins along the way, and then I celebrate the marathon milestones along the way as well. So for me, it was the 10 marathons and then the 25, 50. So they've been celebrated at the time. They were important, and that helped me become a more successful runner for myself.
They're very important lessons to learn to maintain your own peace of mind and sense of capability, and you feel so much better when you're able to achieve goals. And if you have no goals along the way and you never feel like you achieve anything, you don't get that satisfaction.
Yeah, the mental preparation is part of it. So you do need to make yourself a mentally strong person, so an all-round ability. So it's essential for the small wins along the way, and not to go too far in the deep end. So for me, I didn't just jump in and do my overnight run to Mandurah. That was probably 15 years in the build-up before I was ready to do that for me personally. The first 10 years was just getting into the routine and the structure and building on it, working out what is working well for me, what isn't working well. the training structure week to week, what works for me and what doesn't. It was probably 5 years ago I moved away from a high carb diet to a low carb diet. And for me, that worked well. So for me personally, it was about moving into the fat burning adaptation. So just having your body, because I was doing endurance running. So for me, I didn't really need the fast twitch and the carbs and the sugars. So for me, I wanted the slower, try and convert your body over to a longer endurance fat burning process. So it worked for me, and so it doesn't work for everyone. For me, it's personally worked well for me, and I've achieved my best times in the last 5 years, but I've had the previous 10 years was just getting the routine and the pattern and just keep turning up week after week. You can fine tune what works for you best after you've had the experience, and there's no right or wrong answer, but it's being back yourself and don't be afraid to try new things, mix up your training a little bit and meet new people, set new goals, different race distances. I mean, these days you can have trail races and multi-adventure sport races, cycling. I mean, there's Ironmans, there's a whole range of things. So for me, I'm lucky that running's an all year round. In WA, we have pretty much marathons. 10 months of the year is marathon running. It used to be 6 months of the year would be marathon season, and you'd have a 6 month off season. So you need to find something to keep you have new goals, I guess, in the off season. So it's hard to stay motivated. So we're lucky in WA, perfect weather, and get out to new scenery or different park runs. There's probably 35, 40 park runs in WA that you can go out easily go to, and it just mixes it up a little bit, I guess. So try not to get stale in your approach, and you can apply this. It doesn't matter what your hobby and your passion is. Keep it passionate for a reason. So you want to keep the love because that's the pure side of it. For me, you can see it. Everyone who knows me can see that.
That's where the motivation is.
Exactly, yeah. Yep, 100%.
We've had a look now at what it means. We'll have a break, and after the break, we'll look at how you do it. We've got a good understanding now of what it means. Now, we'll look at how do you do it. John, the big question is, how do you do 100 raced marathons? Or do you want to go a little bit smaller and how do we do a marathon?
Take it back to basics, I guess, and starts with a small framework, and you build on your framework and you add to the framework as time goes on. The general framework for running anyway is a midweek medium run, a long run on the weekend. So once a week you do a long run, a medium-sized run, maybe one interval session or like a threshold type run where you're pushing yourself, and then the other days would be recovery, light runs. So that's just the framework in terms of what a long-distance structured training program is. So you want to set yourself up to follow a training plan is a good start. Start with a vision or a goal in terms of what race you're actually aiming to run, and then how much time have you got before that race is on, and just scale it back a little bit. So I do like having, say, a 12-week training plan towards like a goal marathon, but the 12-week plan is good for that race, and you can throw in other races in that 12-week period. And so those smaller races become stepping stones for the marathon maybe at the end of that 12-week period.
Before you go on there, you mentioned a couple of different types of runs that my listeners might not be aware of. So what's a threshold run?
Okay, so a threshold run would be, I guess when you think about training, it's the heart rate zone. So generally you might have zones 1 to 5 where your heart rate, if you move into, say, the zone 5 would be where you get lactic acid build up. It's a sprint, basically, for long distance running.
So it's a high heart rate.
High heart rate, something that you can't maintain. So you don't want to be in zone 5 pretty much never for long distance running. If you get in zone 5, that's probably the 100 meter and 200 meter races for short distance sprinters. So that they'll work in that zone 5 as their training. For long distance runners, it's about, most of the work is done in zone 3. So it's a conversational pace, something you can maintain for, say, half an hour to an hour. So a threshold run would generally be in that zone 4, where you're pushing yourself. It's not conversational pace, and it's something you might be able to maintain for, say, as a rough time frame, say 20 to 30 minutes as a total effort. So you might do some interval running where you might do, say, 1 kilometre faster pace at that non-conversational threshold, the heart rate zone. You might have a 1 kilometre off. So 1 kilometre on, 1 kilometre off. When you're pushing that 1 kilometre, you're pushing yourself into that zone 4. And then in the off, you might drop back to that zone 2 where it's just a light recovery. Back onto that 1 kilometre, you're pushing yourself back into that zone 4 again. So the threshold is just trying to get your race pace, pushing yourself into the uncomfortable zone, but it's manageable. So some of these people pushing themselves in different training programs, the threshold is an important part of it because you want to push yourself in training so that when you come to race day, you've been uncomfortable before in your training, you've tested yourself. On race day, you don't really get the recovery time. So it's the 5 kilometres is a good threshold time trial, sort of what you can maintain. So the threshold is just pushing yourself, going for a higher heart rate and seeing how long you can maintain it for. There's a whole myriad of different intervals, and say there's also, I like to do a progressive run where in training, each kilometre might be slightly quicker than the last kilometre. The tip is to start your first kilometre as slow as possible so that each kilometre you're just going a little bit quicker. But by the end of it, say a 5 or 6 kilometre threshold, it's a progressive threshold. By the last kilometre, your last kilometre is your quickest. So, I mean, people can change things up as to how they want to build that threshold run into their structured week. So threshold's an important one. The medium run midweek, that for me, that might be a 15 to 20 kilometre run, but it's generally in that zone 3. So you're not pushing yourself. You're just trying to maintain time on feet. It's a comfortable run. For marathon running, you just want time on feet is very important. In that middle distance run, a couple of times, you might throw in 1 or 2 kilometre efforts just to go a little bit quicker in that middle distance run. And then your long distance run would be that zone 2 or 3, where for me, it might be a 25 to 35 kilometre, 2 to 2.5 hour sort of run. So they're the key ones where you have a specific outcome of those training runs, and your recovery days are also important as well. So some people might throw in a gym session, cycling, swimming, like just some general cardio, which is good because we're all at different levels of our ability in terms of how many kilometres is manageable. For me, the 100 kilometres a week, I can do that week in, week out. It's not a problem. But for others, it might be that 50 to 60 kilometres a week. But if you can improve your cardio, it's going to give you a better run ability as well. So it doesn't mean you just need to go and do 100 kilometres a week. It's working out what the balance is and what works for you. And your long distance run might only be 10 to 15 kilometres, and that's absolutely fine for where you're at. Medium run might be a 5 to 10 kilometre distance, which is also fine. And your recovery runs might be 2 to 3 kilometres. So it's all relative for where we're at in our journey and what our ability is, and being realistic about what we're trying to get out of it.
So stepping right back to the couch, there's even a couch to 5K program. So in the beginning, those distances are walking, and then occasionally they bring in short distances of running into those programs, and they build you up bit by bit. And the aim for that is to get you to 5 kilometres. And then once you're doing 5 kilometres, well, most people can walk 5 kilometres anyway, but when you build up that little bit, even if you get to that 5Ks once a week and go to parkrun, for example, then even from there you can step up. Parkrun is a great place to meet people who you can then do little bits extra with during the week. Rather than doing one run a week, you can do one run midweek, and you can just build up, and you never go past where you feel comfortable.
Exactly. It's having that routine in place. So it's very important to set up that framework and the structure, what works for you. So how much time have you got to invest into that weekly structure? So a good way at work, say, for example, I like to go out for lunchtime runs. Half an hour is easy. It's done in the middle of the day. There's no competing time constraints other than like meetings, but so a little bit flexible on lunchtime runs, and maybe try and do that 3 or 4 days a week. They're the ones that are just no excuses, go out and get them done. Also, I like to run first thing in the morning as well. So set your alarm, say half an hour earlier, just to give you a little bit extra time out there. So these are all little tools and tips that you can just build on. But the important part is having the routine in place. And once you have the routine in place, it's not a chore, and you do it day after day, week after week. And it doesn't mean you're running 7 days a week. That's something for me that's taken probably 10 years, I guess, to that 7 day a week runner. But in the early days, it was probably 3 days a week. But the routine was important. So I did those 3 runs every week without fail, because that was important to me and that's what I wanted to invest my time in. And it grew from that. So the 3 weekly runs would move into the 4 and the 5 and the weekend long run, those sort of things. So you can build on that as time goes. So the couch to 5 kilometers is perfect. Get into a new routine. You have to start somewhere. So it's that personal challenge, and everyone wants to be the best version of themselves, but time and when that fits into their life and the work-life balance and lifestyle and promoting a healthier lifestyle, it's all, how does it fit in at that point in time? And once you have the foundation, that's when you can build on it and add more time to it, and you can work out what goals you want to move towards. So the parkrun's been perfect in terms of community runners just getting out and doing the 5 kilometers, getting their milestones, the 50, 100 and plus. I think I'm up to about 235 parkruns now. So parkrun's just been a foundation run. That it's my Saturday threshold time trial sort of run generally, and Sunday would be my long run. Occasionally I would miss the parkrun on the Saturday if I'm racing on a Sunday, but I have been known to do a parkrun at moderate pace on the Saturday and then back up on the Sunday and do another race. So each to their own as to what works for them, and some races are more goal races than others. Others are just the stepping stone races along the way. So if it's a goal race, I generally have a race and a B race for the year where they're the important ones. So I wouldn't put myself on the line on the Saturday. The goal race is the one that's your focus for. The ones along the way is just the ones that you've been able to tick off the milestones along the way. So the 100 marathons has been just the 4 or 5 marathons a year has just been, I've been able to chip away at it and still performing for my 1 or 2 key races for that year. I did 10 marathons this year to hit the 100. At the start of the year, I generally like to work up and peak for the races by mid-year when it's winter conditions, perfect running. So for me, it's generally a 3-4 month conditioning peaking phase. So I start the year generally a little bit slower, but by middle of the year, I'm probably 15, 20 minutes quicker, but it's taken me that 4 or 5 months to get that 15, 20 minutes quicker. So I'm still trying to push that 2-hour 40 marathon mark for me. It's been a personal milestone in terms of my marathon goals. So I'm still working towards it. So I'm not writing it off and discounting it just yet. It's still watch this space. I did do a 2:45 was my best marathon time this year. Every marathon I'm proud of anyway, but it's a personal milestones as well as it keeps pushing me along to try and push myself to my limits.
Let's just talk a little bit about the mechanics of getting to enter an event. How do you find an event and enter it?
I guess I'm a seasoned marathon runner now, so I know all my local marathons. In WA, there's probably close to 10 or 11 marathons that we have. There's running calendars. I mean, these days, Google searches and almost every major city has its own marathon, so it's what time of the year it is. And if you want to travel, so if I've had family holidays, it's like, which marathon can I do? What time of the year is it? As to, all right, we're going to go, a destination marathon event it's becoming more and more these days. People will travel overseas. I guess the last few years been a little bit tied down with the COVID travel restrictions. So I've wanted to do some of the overseas marathons, but it's taken a back step just the last few years. So in the next year or two, I am considering, I applied for the Tokyo Marathon, which has probably, you have a 1 in 5 chance of getting selected for the race. So Tokyo is one of the world majors. They have about 50,000 runners in the race, but about 300,000 will apply to get into the race. So unfortunately, I didn't get selected for that race for next year. So I am considering other international race marathons. We're lucky in WA, the local marathons generally don't sell out. So the next one for me is Bustleton, beginning of February. So I think there might be about 250 marathon entries. The races that don't sell out, you can generally enter it in probably the 1 or 2 months prior. And some runners like to choose a race a little bit further out, the 3-4 months, so that they can, once you're entered, you're committed to doing that race. So that's also part of holding you to account, I guess. If you know you've paid your entry fee, they generally say $100 mark for a marathon. Once you've paid your money, there's generally no refund. So you want to make sure you hit the start line, especially as an accountant. I don't like to waste money. So I'm going to turn up, come hell or high water, I'm turning up to get my finish medal. Once I've entered a race, I'm committed to seeing it out. So I like to probably enter no more than 2 or 3 marathons at a time that are spaced out throughout the year, and probably in that 6 to 8 weeks between the marathons. So I think there's also Bunbury, Rottnest Island, Perth Marathon. There's one at Canning River. There's quite a few. We're lucky in WA that we have races spread evenly throughout the year. I think Bibra Lake, the City to Surf used to have a marathon, but that's gone back to just the 12-kilometre distance City to Surf. So, yeah, we're lucky here that we've got so many to choose from.
And if you get involved in the community, particularly parkrun, but if you get to an event, then all you need to do is talk to people and you'll find events.
Oh, definitely. The parkrun is good because, there's the tail walker, and there's a reason they're called tail walker, so that they'll come. You're guaranteed you won't come last unless you're the tail walker. So there's always someone there ready to have a chat. In my early days of running, I was in the Brisbane run community. I moved to Perth probably 15 years ago. But being part of a running club, and the parkrun is essentially the same thing these days as local run communities. We don't need the formal, like the WAMC, the formal marathon run clubs. The smaller communities is its own run community. So turn up and chat to other runners. You'll find someone who's quicker than you, slower than you, but you've got the same thing in common. You're there to turn up and do the parkrun or other distances. Different events are on. There's so many to choose from. So just chat to people, because you'll find out they have the same goals that you do, or very similar, and they also have the training program that they're following, and they might have entered a marathon or a half marathon that they're working towards. So just chat to as many people as you can. You'll find people out there doing similar goals that you're aiming towards as well.
And then after that, it's just like buying something online. You just find the website and spend the money.
Yeah, exactly. So make that commitment, and then you can build onto it from there. So, there are in WA, it's the West Australian Marathon Club, have an all-year program available. So if you go onto their website, they generally like to build race distances towards key events. So the Perth Marathon is in October, but the run calendar is aimed towards, say, the 10-kilometre bridge run, the half marathon. I think there's one at Joondalup. So there's ways that you build up your races to get you to October, which is generally a good time of the year to all your training is keyed towards that goal race that you might choose middle of the year or October. So I encourage people to enter a race, get out there and do it, and they keep coming back for more, I guess. So try and improve on their own times. And it's not always about the time anyway. It's about finishing as well, has its own place. I've done a few marathons where I've been happy. I've come off an injury and I'm happy just to finish a race. But generally, I do like to race and push yourself to that uncomfortable point, the breaking point in the race, overcome that adversity and push through and still get to the finish line. So everyone has their own story. Chat to others, see where they're at in their run journey as well, and you'll find you have a lot in common.
Well, thank you very much, John, for coming on to Forest.chat. And all the Forest.chat listeners wish you the best in your future endeavours, which I probably should ask, like, you've done 100, what's next?
Well, I briefly considered retiring at the 100 mark, but because of my age, I'm 43, I'm too young to retire. So I'm also too young to go back into ultramarathon running. So I think for me, I've got my mind set on the 150 marathon. So I think that will set me up for the next 10 years at least. And then probably come back and have another chat. So it's been great. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for inviting me along. It's been great.
Been wonderful having you here, John. Thank you very much. You've been listening to Forest.chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, And in today's episode, we talked with John Pendse about 100 competitive marathons, a huge effort. Remember, there are 4 ways to get involved with forest.chat. Share the domain forest.chat with your friends and family and people you meet. If you subscribe to the emails, you get advance notice of the episodes. Listen to the episodes at forest.chat/episodes. If you're doing something interesting or have done something interesting in the past that other people might find encouraging or inspiring, then book an interview at forest.chat/interview. If you want to support a local business, book an advert at forest.chat/advert. I'm looking forward to being with our next guest. Until then, enjoy making it happen.